Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping back in time to look at the anatomy of a truly staggering historical catastrophe. I mean, we are talking about a disaster that, before the atomic age, was quite literally one of the largest human-made explosions the world had ever seen. There was no grand scheme here, no countdown clock, and definitely no enemy bomber. Instead, we're going to see how a completely ordinary morning unraveled into absolute chaos in less time than it takes most of us to drink a cup of coffee.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture it, December 6th, 1917. It's a bitter, freezing cold morning in Halifax, Canada. The First World War has been raging over in Europe for more than 3 years now, and because of that, Halifax Harbour has completely transformed. It's become one of the busiest, most vital wartime ports in all of North America. You've got ships carrying troops, heavy weapons, essential supplies, all gathering here before braving the Atlantic. It is crowded, it's heavily protected, and on this specific morning, as people are just heading off to work and kids are walking to school, this bustling harbor traffic is just a normal, everyday backdrop.
But hidden within that traffic, two very specific ships are on a collision course. On one hand, we've got the SS Imo, which is a Norwegian vessel, and on the other, a French cargo ship named the SS Mont-Blanc. Now, if you were just standing on the docks looking at the Mont-Blanc, it looked completely unremarkable, just another gray merchant ship floating through the chilly water. But secretly, it was packed with a terrifying cargo meant for the war in Europe. Hidden deep in its holds were thousands of tons of explosives. We're talking TNT, picric acid, and highly flammable benzol. It was literally a floating powder keg navigating right through this crowded, bustling city harbor.
So, to get out to the open ocean, the Mont-Blanc had to pass through this tight little bottleneck in the harbor called the Narrows. And coming from the exact opposite direction was the Imo. The crews on both of these ships saw each other. They even exchanged signals. But, well, in the tight confines of the Narrows, there was some terrible confusion over positioning and who actually had the right of way. Both crews frantically scrambled to maneuver out of the way, but it was just too late. At right around 8:45 a.m., these two massive iron ships collided. Now, you might picture a catastrophic high-speed ramming, but it wasn't. It was really just a low-speed bump. But because of what was sitting inside the Mont-Blanc, that simple bump was an absolute death sentence.
That seemingly minor impact was just enough to knock over those containers of benzol stored up on the Mont-Blanc's deck. This highly volatile liquid just rapidly spilled everywhere, and as the metal hulls of the two ships scraped together, it generated sparks. And wow, that was all it took. The benzol ignited instantly, and a massive fire broke out. The crew of the Mont-Blanc, the only people in the entire harbor who actually knew it was ticking beneath their feet, they didn't hesitate for a second. They abandoned ship immediately, leaving this fiercely burning vessel to just drift aimlessly toward the Halifax waterfront.
From the exact moment of that collision, the clock started ticking. Just 19 minutes. That's it. 19 minutes separated a completely normal Thursday morning from absolutely unimaginable devastation.
I want you to imagine being a citizen in Halifax right at this moment. You look out your living room window, or maybe you're walking near the waterfront and you see this thick, black smoke billowing up into the crisp winter air. You hear shouting from the docks and you see bright orange flames just dancing on the deck of this drifting ship. I mean, it's a dramatic, mesmerizing spectacle, right? Naturally, people stopped whatever they were doing to watch. Factory workers paused on the job, families stepped out onto their front porches, and kids literally pressed their faces right up against the glass of their windows to get a better look. They had absolutely no idea they were staring at a floating bomb.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that amidst all this chaos, one man actually grasped the true danger. Vincent Coleman was a railway dispatcher working right near the waterfront. He somehow learned exactly what was inside that burning ship drifting toward the docks, and he knew a passenger train was scheduled to pull into Halifax at any minute. So he had a choice. He had a brief window to run for his life. But instead, he turned back to his telegraph office. He frantically sent a warning message down the line, ordering all incoming trains to stop immediately. He chose to stay at his post just to send that warning.
Meanwhile, out on the water, the fire on the Mont-Blanc is just raging completely out of control. Firefighters are rushing toward the waterfront, totally unaware of what they're walking into. The flames are burning hotter, deeper, eating right through the wooden decks and creeping inevitably closer to those massive holds packed tight with TNT and picric acid. The temperature inside the ship's hull is rapidly reaching a critical threshold, the absolute point of no return.
And then, at exactly 9:04 a.m., the Mont-Blanc exploded.
For a fraction of a second, the harbor was subjected to unimaginably violent physics. That massive cargo ship instantly vaporized. A supersonic blast wave ripped outward through the streets of Halifax at thousands of miles per hour. Buildings were crushed like they were made of paper.
A massive tsunami of displaced water surged violently outward, slamming right into the shoreline. A massive chunk of the Mont-Blanc's iron anchor was hurled literally kilometers away. And tragically, because so many hundreds of people had been watching that fire from their homes, the shockwave shattered windows for miles, sending flying glass straight into the faces of onlookers. Thousands of people suffered permanent eye injuries in a single millisecond.
The Richmond neighborhood, which sat closest to the explosion, was essentially erased. Homes just disappeared. Sturdy brick factories collapsed into piles of dust. Entire streets, filled with life and families just seconds before, were rendered completely unrecognizable. An ordinary morning had literally been wiped off the map.
The human cost of those 19 minutes is truly staggering to comprehend. Roughly 2,000 people were killed in the blast. Thousands more were terribly, terribly injured. The hospitals, well, the ones that were still standing anyway, were completely overwhelmed. In a matter of seconds, tens of thousands of people were left entirely homeless, desperately searching through the smoldering rubble for their loved ones.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how cruel nature can be, because the very next day, a severe winter blizzard struck the devastated city. Heavy snow started blanketing the burning rubble. Temperatures just plummeted. People who had just lost their homes, their families, and all their possessions were now forced to survive a brutal Canadian winter storm with literally no shelter. The suffering was compounded in the absolute worst way possible.
But, they weren't alone. As news of this unprecedented disaster spread outward along the surviving telegraph lines, massive aid began to mobilize. And one response in particular really stands out. More than 600 kilometers away, the city of Boston immediately sprang into action. They loaded up entire trains with medical personnel, vital supplies, and emergency workers, and just rushed them north to the overwhelmed city, providing life-saving assistance exactly when Halifax needed it most.
And the gratitude for that immediate, unhesitating help forged a bond that actually survives to this very day. More than a century later, as a symbol of their enduring thanks, the province of Nova Scotia still selects and sends a beautiful, massive Christmas tree to the city of Boston every single year. It's this incredibly touching, living tradition, born right out of one of the darkest days in Canadian history.
So the crucial point is, when the smoke finally cleared and the snow melted, the world demanded answers, right? Who was responsible for this? How could a disaster of this unimaginable scale actually happen? Officials launched intense investigations immediately. People connected to the Mont Blanc were even initially arrested. But as the courts meticulously examined the facts, the legal story became highly, highly complicated. There was no single villain here, there was no enemy attack, and there was absolutely no deliberate sabotage.
What the investigation ultimately exposed was a deeply tragic chain reaction. It was a perfect storm of minor navigational misunderstandings in a crowded, high-stress space, immense wartime pressure, and an incredibly dangerous cargo. It wasn't malice, It was just two ships meeting at the exact wrong place, at the exact wrong time, carrying exactly the wrong cargo.
It's profoundly disturbing when you really step back and realize how mundane the beginning of this event actually was. We tend to think of history shifting because of grand declarations by kings or presidents. But here, history changed because of heavy harbor traffic and a simple miscommunication. Two ships bumped into each other at a crawl on a cold December morning. At 8:45, they collided. At 9:04, Halifax exploded. 19 minutes. That is literally all it took for their world to change forever. Vincent Coleman, the railway dispatcher, didn't make it out of his telegraph office that day. But his final warning, sent in the terrifying shadow of a burning ship, traveled farther than he ever would, saving countless lives on those incoming trains. We study these events not just to look back at the tragedy, but to understand how incredibly fragile our world can be. As our source material beautifully states, time leaves clues. We follow them. So, what everyday clues might be hiding in plain sight today? Thank you so much for exploring this piece of history with me. Keep following the clues.